Hello, so good evening to our Neighbourhood Watch ASB Awareness Week webinars. Today we're delighted to welcome Charlie and Kate from ASB Help. Charlie is the Specialist Victims Project Manager and Kate is the Practitioner Support Manager from ASB Help. What we would ask you to do is just to make sure that your microphones are switched off and put all the questions in the chat so that we can then, during the question and answer session after the presentation, that we can then make sure that your questions are answered. What we will do also is after the event, we'll be sending the questions over to Kate and Charlie to ask them to answer any of those that we can't answer ourselves, and then we'll pass them on to everybody that attended the webinars this week so that you'll receive some more information. So thank you so much, and I'll hand over to Charlie and Kate.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm hoping that you will find our webinar interesting. I'm just going to try and flick through these slides and just bear with me because tech is not my my forte. So if we make it through, we've done well between us. Okay. So just to tell you a little bit about ourselves at ASB Help and our charity. In 2007, you'll see the pictures on the screen there. This is Fiona and Francesca Pilkington, who lived in Leicester. Fiona and her family were subjected to a 10-year campaign of antisocial behaviour. Despite making numerous reports to agencies, local authorities, police, housing providers in the local area, unfortunately, Fiona and her family did not receive a kind of adequate support and response for their case. The information was not potentially shared and links weren't made between agencies, so there wasn't a fantastic resolution to this case of antisocial behaviour. And unfortunately, Fiona did take the decision to end her own life and that of her daughter Francesca. Now, in the light of that horrific tragedy in 2007, our founder, Julian Richer of Richer Sounds, was so moved by this story and felt so passionately that victims of antisocial behaviour just didn't have a voice and didn't have anywhere to turn to, didn't know where to go for support, that he wanted to change that. And so ASB Help was born, and we started off as a website with one woman at the helm, basically fielding inquiries from practitioners and victims alike around, where do we turn to, who can do something about this, where, what do we have to do to look after ourselves. And from there, it's kind of grown exponentially, really. So it's coming up on 10 years that the charity's been active. We're now a team of 5, and we cover all of England and Wales, kind of championing the victim's voice. We sit on the ASB strategic board with the Home Office, so we really have an opportunity to lobby for change and chip in on sort of legislation around antisocial behaviour enforcement. And we also work very closely with many victims who come through our service to advise them and support them and point them in the right direction of both what their rights are and what help is available out there for them. So it's a great job. It's a Marmite job. I think you'll hear a lot of people say when it comes to antisocial behaviour, you either love it or you hate it, because it can sometimes be thankless, and it can sometimes be it feels like you're not getting anywhere, you're wading through mud, but actually it's just such a fantastic cause. And what you'll find is that as the evening goes on, Katie and I are both extremely passionate about what we do, and obviously we love a fight for the underdog, so that's why we're here. Okay, 16 years on then from Fiona Pilkington's tragedy. How have we progressed? After that, there was a lot of talk around risk management and case management, information sharing and partnership working, and the classic, we must learn lessons and we must move forward. And have we, I suppose, is the question. We feel very much that a lot has changed and a lot has improved. ASB is very much more in the spotlight nowadays. It's getting more focus from the government. It's becoming a lot more prevalent within police forces, housing associations, local authority as a priority. we obviously always feel that there can be more to be done, especially when you see the faces as you do in front of you here, which are a selection of people who since Fiona have also lost their lives in the course of an antisocial behaviour case, either through taking their own lives or they have been murdered. And it's a very real issue that we deal with every day, and something that can escalate extraordinarily quickly. The gentleman that you'll see on your screen there with his thumb up is a gentleman called Matthew Borman, who'd just been engaged in an argument with his neighbour over the case of about 15 years. The whole street had been involved in some sort of dispute with this one individual who'd been sort of quite prolifically committing antisocial behaviour on the street. And we're probably just talking things like inconsiderate parking and loud music and maybe foul language, nothing that you think would you'd necessarily consider calling 999 for, I suppose. And that's the point. And unfortunately, after a course of this 15-year problem, the individual concerned was arrested and was subject to charges for harassment. When he was released on bail, the first thing he did was return to his home and he stabbed Mr. Borman to death on the front garden. So, you know, it's a very real issue that we're still dealing with, and that we are still having to highlight, that something that is quite often dismissed as trivial or as petty in the grand scheme of things. You know, when we're talking about organised crime and human trafficking, etc., people do tend to think, oh, you know, a bit of fly tipping and a bit of loud music, you know, what's the big deal? Come on, put things in perspective. But when this is something that you're experiencing every single day of your life and it is impacting how you live your life to the point where you have to make changes and your mental health is impacted, then absolutely it is very, very serious. And so that is where we are today, that we are continuing to lobby for the spotlight, basically. We stamp our feet until we get heard, and we will continue to do so. Okay, so what is antisocial behaviour? I guess the official definition would be behaviour that causes harassment, alarm or distress to an individual, or in a residential setting, it's nuisance and annoyance. Now, the difficulty with language like that is that it's very subjective, and it's based on what might affect one person doesn't necessarily affect the next person in the same way. So we have to be very mindful of what's reasonable in terms of behaviour that we're talking. So clearly, when we're looking at these pictures here, you know, the fly tipping there and the waste that's been thrown out, the broken up cars that, you know, we can find these outside residential properties if businesses are being run. Things like that absolutely are not reasonable. It's not acceptable to dump waste like that. You know, motorbikes riding across the playing fields when your kids are trying to have a game of football, and dogs that are dangerously out of control. Of course, those are unreasonable. The top one, the gentleman who's clearly listening to some very loud music. Absolutely, if that music is keeping you awake at night, if it is intruding into your home to the point where you can't go about your daily life, then that is not a reasonable, you know, a reasonable behaviour. However, if maybe someone has a party and it goes on a bit late one weekend, but actually it's the first time they've done it and they don't do it again for, you know, years to come, then we have to ask ourselves, okay, maybe it was a bit inconsiderate, but unreasonable, not necessarily. And so it's finding that balance of tolerance with each other. So, you know, this is what we look at when we're talking about antisocial behaviour: what's reasonable, what's distressing, what's harmful. And I use the word harmful because, and Katie will touch on this a little bit more later when we talk about the case review. Harm, again, is very subjective. And so we kind of turn it on its head. So rather than saying, well, that's not serious enough for us to take action, we look at the harm caused and the impact it's having on an individual. And actually, even if it's something that potentially could happen to me and then it wouldn't necessarily upset me in the course of my life, if it's evident that that is causing you serious distress and it is impacting you, then it's not about the behaviour, it's about how it's impacting you. And that is enough for us to want to take action and want to address that. Just because two people aren't affected by something in the same way doesn't mean that they're not affected. So, you know, that's really a very key point when we look at antisocial behaviour, just asking yourself that question: how does it make me feel? And is it reasonable? So who can help? When we talk about making reports, we would always advise the local authority as one of the first ports of call. So in terms of noise, nuisance, fly tipping, littering, dog waste, etc., environmental health, ASB teams, you may want to talk to, there's licensing departments, community safety. Some local authorities have their own housing stock. So there is generally going to be a department within your local authority that has got a team that can address the issue that you are dealing with. And you know, we will talk a little bit about tools later, but there is a wide-ranging set of tools that can be used, and actually they're not independent from each other. So we can sometimes work together. These departments can work together to tackle a problem in different ways. The next one being, of course, the police. We always say phone the police if you feel that you're under threat, if you are feeling that you're at risk of harm, and also, you know, the non-emergency lines. I want to say 10, is it 101 or 111? My mind's gone blank. 101.
101. 111's the medical.
Absolutely, my mind went totally blank. That's really bad. I'm so sorry. It's something you say every day, and you get 101. You know, always make those reports. So even if it's not an urgent call to service, if there's not an emergency happening at this exact moment, but something's happened, phone 101, make that report, because then it's recorded and it's documented, and it helps partner agencies when they're working together to discuss a case. They've got that big picture, they can see everything that's been happening, and it obviously paints much more of a picture of what's been experienced. And housing associations, so landlords do have, you know, they have great powers in their toolkit to deal with any of their tenants who are potentially perpetrating antisocial behaviour. If their tenants are victims of antisocial behaviour, they also have the ability to liaise with partners to take steps to alleviate that. So those are the three key players: your local authority, your police, and your housing associations. And we would always advise a victim experiencing any form of antisocial behaviour to report to at least one of these agencies. Katie, I can see you want to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to come in and just say, I heard from a victim last week that actually said that their housing association can't help because the perpetrator is a homeowner and it's them that are the housing association tenant. If you've heard that before, please rest assured that isn't the case. If it's affecting their housing management function, so whether the perpetrator is a housing association tenant, or as long as the housing management link, it doesn't matter. So an injunction, etc., and work can be done for a person perpetrating ASB and the victim is a housing association tenant, or vice versa. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, again, it comes down to that, you know, prioritizing the victim, doesn't it? We're not trying to categorize, we're just trying to do, you know, what's in the arsenal there to protect the victim.
Absolutely.
Okay, and finally, just additional support there. So there's always places like citizens advice, victim support in certain areas. Your local GP, if you are suffering, if you are stressed and you are going through something like this, please don't do it alone, and please pass that on to your communities after this webinar. You know, there is always somebody to talk to, who may be able to signpost you and offer you some additional support, including, you know, the law centre we've got there as well. Now, obviously, this is kind of postcode specific, so each area is going to have different provisions as to what's available there. But a quick Google search, and even, you know, if you're coming up unlucky, access our website. The details will be at the end of this session. We have a wealth of information on there. We also have contact forms, so you can get in touch with our team to see, you know, how we can advise you. So, you know, please do that. But the most important thing is don't try and go through something alone, because you just don't have to. There are ways and means that you can be supported and helped through it. So please do get in touch. So what can be done? We've got early intervention, and this is one that we're really quite passionate about, because it's very much a case of, if we can get in there early and we can perhaps stop and diffuse situations before they escalate to the point of, well, as we discussed earlier, fatalities or confrontations or having to take enforcement action, then fantastic. So we've actually today, myself, I've been in some of the local schools in my area, talking to the primary school children around antisocial behaviour and what it is, and what they should do if they see it. And it was, to be fair, it was a really lovely session because the kids were really engaged and they wanted to share experiences that they'd had. One girl was even telling me about how they used to have a dog and her big sister always used to walk the dog and never ever picked up the dog's poop, despite being told to all the time. And so they haven't got the dog anymore. And this poor little girl who was 5 was absolutely mortified this morning when she found out that actually that's antisocial behaviour and her big sister could have been in a lot of trouble had she been caught not picking up after the dog. But it was just really positive to kind of have that engagement with the children and them wanting to learn. So we very much advocate for that as much as we can in the areas that we work with, to put on those diversionary activities, put on the engagement sessions with youngsters to try and share the information, and we bring them up that they kind of know their right from wrong, and then what to do and how to go about these things. So it's really important. Obviously mediation we've got there, which is often something we really advocate for, but it has to be done early. Quite often, as soon as harsh words have been exchanged, or certainly if things have escalated to the point of damage or confrontation, it can be quite hard to claw those cases back to the point of mediation where we can sort of have a civilized conversation and try and find a compromise. So it's a very important tool, but one that absolutely has to be used at the right time. ABCs, you'll see there that is an acceptable behaviour contract. So that is something that is quite often used in housing associations with tenants, where it's just asking individuals to basically commit to a course of behaviour. And actually, it's not a course of behaviour that's anything above the ordinary. It's kind of just saying this is what's acceptable. And this is what we would all expect to behave in our local communities, and this is what we expect from you. And so we're asking someone to commit to that, and it's almost a little bit of a guidance. Similarly, good neighbour agreements, so quite often used in estates and blocks of flats, etc., where it's just trying to ask for that consideration between neighbours and that thoughtfulness of how we interact and how we behave, so we're not impacting each other's lives. And obviously there's always an option of warnings, so a bit of a shot across the bow of, right, we've had reports that this has been happening, let's nip it in the bud now before anyone kind of falls out or escalates and that impact gets worse, and just offering a bit of guidance as to what behaviour is acceptable. So early intervention, of course, is ideal and it's really key, but it doesn't always work that way. And that's when we come on to incremental enforcement. And it is at this point I'm actually going to pass on to my good friend and glamorous colleague, Katie.
I wouldn't go glamorous, but thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Charlie. Yeah, I think what is really important to note is that the majority of ASB is resolved by early intervention. I recognise that there's quite a lot of chat that I've tried to respond to. If people have got individual concerns and want individual advice, please look at our website. There's loads of information there, and actually if you still can't get what you're after, there's a contact us form, and one of us will be in touch. And I can see that there's quite a lot of ongoing persistent ASB where you're not getting the answers you've required. So actually me saying that ASB is resolved predominantly by early intervention, I understand that there are some of you listening today that aren't in that situation.
Probably sitting there shaking their heads.
Yeah, so I mean, most if we're going to take legal action, obviously the majority of those legal actions go through court. So it's a matter of the practitioners that you're liaising with compiling a whole case to put together for the court to ask that judge for that order. And in order for that judge to grant that order, quite often they like to see that you've dotted the T's and you've crossed the I's and you've shown that incremental approach of trying to tackle the issue at you'd always go in it from a practitioner's point of view as the lowest level of intervention that is more than likely to have a result. So, and you'd want to just show that you've tried everything within your reach. We recognise that some behaviour isn't like that, and actually the behaviour, it has to be proportionate action. And actually, if someone's made threats to kill, then you're not going to go in with a warning letter. And it just has to be proportionate. But yeah, I think once your early interventions that Charlie's mentioned have kind of looked at in the majority of cases, then you will look at if they've been issued with a first warning letter, then there might be some final warning letters. You then obviously, before taking court action, if you're looking at house legislation and you're looking at eviction routes, then you have to serve notices before you go down that route of court action. So you'd have a notice of seeking possession is what a housing association or local authority would refer to, or a demoted notice, which reduces the tenure of the security of that tenancy to a lesser one for 12 months. So tenancy actions is your warning letters and moving forward through that process. But obviously the ASB Crime and Policing Act, which was introduced in 2014, there was a lot of tools and powers before then. There was like 21 doing all different functions. So the ASB Crime and Policing Act sought to reduce that down to 6 to make it easier, quicker and efficient to tackle antisocial behaviour. So those 6 are detailed in there's some really good guidance out there for practitioners, but actually it's a really easy read for people that don't work within the field too. So if you do want to know more, then I would suggest that each individual tool that's introduced by that act is detailed within that statutory guidance, which you just have to put into Google ASB statutory guidance, and it will come up on the Home Office pages. But the 6 tools that were introduced by that act were the CPN, so Community Protection Notice, but there's also a Community Protection Warning that goes before that. I'll go through that in a second. Closure powers, which have the ability to close a property, regardless of whether it's a homeowner or a telephone box or a car park. It has you can close that land or property for 3 months initially, but potentially up to 6 months. There's injunctions, which are on individuals, which in really simple layman's terms is they'll put prohibitions, so stop someone doing what they shouldn't be doing, and also put in positive things about what things they could do to address maybe alcohol, substance misuse that contribute to the ASB that they're causing. There is a PSPO, so a Public Space Protection Order. I recognise there's loads of acronyms here today, so I'll try not to use that much jargon. So a PSPO you might see in a city centre, and it's more to do with public space and managing ASB in that public space as opposed to a particular individual. So you might see them on dog mess, you might see them on car cruising, might see them on legal highs and the nitrous oxide, all of those kind of things. The police also have dispersal orders, again something that came in with the ASB Crime and Policing Act, so have the ability to disperse where there's ASB or potential ASB going on, to disperse that group and not to return to that area for a set period of time. And much like the injunction, there is a criminal behaviour order. So if you hear the term CBO, that's what the police will be referring to, and police can apply for this power generally, and it's only on the back of a conviction. So it's in essence it's an injunction, so puts prohibitions and positive requirements in place, but it has to have a conviction, not just an arrest. It needs someone to have that arrest, charged and convicted of an offence. There are 6 tools and powers. They all have different thresholds to meet. So we talked about the definition of ASB being kind of nuisance and annoyance in a residential setting and harassment, alarm and distress in a non-residential setting. But actually it gets a little bit more woolly than that. Whereas if you look at a community protection warning, which is issued, you need to demonstrate detrimental effect on a community, persistent in nature and unreasonable. So it depends on the tool you're using, depends on what as a practitioner you'd be looking at, but that's more important for the practitioner to understand than you guys. If you're experiencing ASB, the most important thing you need to do is continue to report. I understand that diary sheets are probably the bane of people's lives and they don't see anything from them. You continue to put them in and actually you don't, for some time you don't see any action from them. But what I can say is they're really, really useful when it comes to that enforcement action, because when you're putting together a victim statement and you've got a chronology of all the incidents that you've experienced and you can exhibit those to your victim statement, then they're worth their weight in gold. So you might not see immediate action. Taking someone's home from them is really draconian, and it's a real ask on a judge to say, I'm going to make this person homeless. So they want to make sure that this is a last resort, but all that work you've been putting in and all those reports that you've been making will all go then in your final statement, if it gets that far. But like I said, hopefully it doesn't, and hopefully it will be resolved at a much earlier stage. The one thing I've noticed is some people are told, well, you've got to wait for the police to take action before the council or the housing association can. Not necessarily true. Criminal, it obviously has to be proven beyond all reasonable doubt. So there is a definite certainty that person has committed that crime and it can be proven to that standard. And it's all about punishment for that offence. Whereas actually, if you look at civil action, so the action that we've just talked about, those 6 tools and powers from the ASB Crime and Policing Act, apart from the CBO, they're all civil standard, which is balance of probabilities. And the easiest way of explaining that is if you've got a set of scales and you're tipping them in the balance that actually it's more likely to have occurred than hasn't occurred, then you will have proven that point. So we're working on a much lesser threshold, and we're also looking at preventing. It's not about punishment, so the police can go away and take action on that criminal aspect, but doesn't mean that the local authority, housing or police can't take civil action in relation to the ongoing prevention moving forward, which is where the tools and powers come into play. That's that slide in a nutshell, Charlie.
No,
so
perfect, thank you.
I'm just gonna bring you onto a brief case example really of where those kind of tools and powers might apply. So we've got here a complainant reports repeated loud music late at night to environmental health. Obviously this is a common occurrence, and it's a common incident that occurs within the ASB world, and we're all familiar with that. The complainant is given diary sheets, like I mentioned previously, to complete, and a door knock is undertaken in the vicinity, which corroborates the complaint. So we've got other residents that have heard the noise as well. That's great. That's really good evidence going forward. So environmental health install noise monitoring equipment to collect the data. I'm sure many of you will have either experienced it or know that's in existence. And the perpetrator is issued with a tenancy warning letter, because they're obviously in housing association or local authority property. And they're also issued with a community protection warning. So I mentioned the community protection notices earlier. In order to serve a community protection notice, you need to have issued a warning and give them chance to rectify their behaviour and adhere to the terms of that warning. So one of those has been issued to say you need to keep your noise down. It needs to be quite prescriptive, and it needs to be quite clear and concise, and it needs to have be proportionate. You can only be asking for terms that obviously there's evidence for. So the complainant reports further incidents of loud noise after this warning's been issued. So environmental health install some noise monitoring equipment again to collect further data to see whether there's a breach of that, see whether there's further breaches. The perpetrator is issued with a community protection notice, because obviously we've served the warning first for the ASB, and a noise abatement notice, which is it doesn't sit within the ASB Crime and Policing Act, that sits with environmental health. So there are two different things. Noise covers all, like noise in environmental health terms, they've got their environmental health legislation, but it's really important to realise noise is an umbrella term. So noise can cover quite a lot of different types of ASB. So it's really important those departments within the local authority are talking to each other. And a community protection notice can cover noise as well. So a noise abatement notice is issued, as well as a second tenancy warning letter, which is great because it shows that the housing department of your local authority or the housing association are liaising with the environmental health team. So really good, solid partnership work. Hopefully those two things will put an end to those kind of cases. Do recognise that sometimes that isn't the case, and that's where you then look at the toolkit again, and as practitioners you supply the evidence. The only thing you should be really considering at the moment in time is making sure you report things, and it's up to the practitioners on the ground to then decide on the most appropriate course of action. Albeit, like I said, I recognise that sometimes victims are tearing their hair out and not getting the answers they require, and that's where kind of the stat guidance and our website information is really useful if you want to explore those details in a little bit further, so you can see what your rights are and what you should be pushing for if you're not getting the answers that you actually require.
Can I just add on to that, Katie, actually, and I probably should have said this earlier. One thing we always say in terms of you know, when we talk about diary sheets and documentation and collecting evidence, there is always that kind of onus placed on the victim by the agencies. You know, show us what's going on so we can do something about it, and tell it, you know, keep diary sheets, capture evidence. There's a balance there. Of course, we as practitioners, they need to know what's happening in order to look at what is the best plan for resolving it. But what we would say as a charity is never ever put yourself in harm's way. No. So never do anything that would antagonize or instigate anything. Never put yourself in a situation where, for example, if you're caught filming someone doing something and they turn on you, we would never ever advise you to do that, because it is simply not worth the risk and potentially is only going to make the situation worse for you. So yeah. Of course, if you're inside your home and there's loud music and you can record it from your living room to document what's going on and fill in those diary sheets, absolutely fantastic. That helps build that picture. Please don't go outside, stand in the street and try and capture what's going on, you know, in full view. Or if you see that there's an incident going on, go outside and engage with it. You know, we always say, please, your first priority needs to be keeping yourselves, your families and your property safe. So that is all any agency would ever ask you to do within the boundaries of keeping yourself safe. That's really important. So I just realised I should have said that earlier, because it's come up quite a lot over the last week, I think, hasn't it, Katie, in discussions we've had. So
yeah, absolutely.
Bear that in mind.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that everything here is how things happen. We do recognise as a charity, we're here to help victims that are suffering ASB. So we do often hear from victims that are banging their heads up against wall, struggling and feel like agencies aren't listening to them. There's a lot of good practice out there, I will add, but also we do recognise that there are definitely, there's room for improvement. And if we can offer any advice in relation to any particular cases, if people are looking for particular answers, like I said, get in touch. Use our contact form or use the website, and there is some really valuable information in there for victims to feel empowered and feel like they're actually listened to, which then nicely brings me on to the ASB case review. So some of you, depending on where you live in the country, some of you might be know this tool as a community trigger, which it's been known, the name's been used interchangeably. So it's either been community trigger, ASB case review, use which one you like, depending on which area you are in. In March this year, it was decided in legislation to just call it the ASB case review. Some people might now then put in brackets formerly known as the community trigger, just so people are aware of that distinction and that change. But in essence, if you hear those two words, it does mean the same thing. So what is it? It's the victims tool, and again introduced by the ASB Crime and Policing Act. It is the victim's voice. It's to try and stop those cases and have that safety net to ensure that people aren't suffering persistently from ongoing ASB. And what it does, it's a statutory process that is required in every single area in England and Wales for a victim to have the right to request a review of their case. Now, when I say request a review, I don't mean a complaint. And it's really difficult to, it really requires some clarification in relation to that. So it's a problem solving exercise. Are you undergoing ongoing antisocial behaviour? If so, then we want to problem solve that and move forward. So it is all about partnership working and multi-agency approach. If you've got a complaint about service, there is there's complaints procedures for each and every organisation. This is simply about, let's find a way forward. Let's try and resolve this ASB. And they might, they will have to know what's gone on before and what action's been taken to determine what they can do moving forward. But it's all really constructive, it's all problem solving, and they will try and put an action plan in place to resolve the ASB going forward. But in order to raise it, they need an application form. So that's from yourself or someone acting on behalf of yourself. Am I moving on to the next slide now, Charlie?
Sorry, I was a little bit behind there.
No. I was speaking before the I didn't know whether that was the next slide or not. I couldn't remember.
Just to apologise, sorry for that. I was a little bit distracted because all I can hear is my 6-year-old downstairs shouting at the TV. So I really do apologise if anyone else is sharing that experience with me currently. That's what had just taken my mind elsewhere.
No,
okay,
we can't.
There you go.
Well, I can't anyway. So in terms of the ASB case review, who can use it? So anyone can use that. So it can be the victim, it can be someone on behalf of the victim, as long as they've got the consent. So that can be a practitioner, it can be a police officer, it can be a housing officer, it can be a friend, it can be an MP. It can also be a community or a business, because we've got to recognise ASB doesn't discriminate. Anyone can be a victim of antisocial behaviour. So the tool is there for all, regardless of tenure. So even if you're a homeowner or a local author or a private rented, you have access to this case review. We always, and we will continue to lobby for it to be as easy as possible for a person to submit an application. So I like to see a variety of ways, whether that's online, a downloadable form, in person, in writing, on the end of the phone. We've got to realise we're a really diverse society, and it should be accessible for all of those, regardless of whether you've got accessibility issues, vulnerabilities, etc. We've got to ensure that it's available. But in order to raise the ASB case review, there is a threshold that needs to be met. Have we got that on the next slide, Charlie? Or
I don't think I have actually.
Okay, so that's fine.
Part of this, so I'll let you do. Yeah, I'll let you do that, and then I'll move on.
Okay.
Because I know that you just know it like the back of your hand.
The back of my hand.
Sorry.
So in order to meet the threshold for the ASB case review, it will be 3 incidents of antisocial behaviour reported to a local authority, the housing provider, or the police within a 6-month period prior to that application being made. Now, lots of you might have experienced far more than 3. So what I would suggest is you either pick the 3 most recent incidents, or you pick the 3 most prominent incidents that you think demonstrate the problem. There should be somewhere on the form to give a little bit more context about that as well. And the ASB is still ongoing. So there hasn't been any action that's been effective in tackling that antisocial behaviour so far. Now, what we do find is that some local authorities, because it's generally the local authority that administers the process, even though it's a multi-agency approach. And what I will say, sorry, is those 3 incidents that I've mentioned don't need to be reported to one particular organisation. So if you've had 1 incident and reported the same incident to all 3, then it's 1 incident. But if you've reported 3 separate incidents, 2 to the police and 1 to the local authority, that doesn't matter. That's 3 incidents. As long as you've reported 3 to those any of those 3 agencies, then theoretically it should meet the threshold. Now, what we will say as ASB Help, organisations have started to put a few extra caveats in, like your case must be closed, or the last incident needs to have occurred within the last month. And that's not right. They're not in the legislation, and we're trying our very best to lobby on behalf of victims and act as that collective voice to kind of say you need to review your policies and procedures, because if you meet the threshold in one area and you're experiencing ASB, you should meet it regardless. But what I would say is check out your local authority website, see what they've got on there, and actually if you pick up that it's not what we're saying today, then let us know, because we'll pick that up with them and see whether we can work with them to change their processes and improve their service delivery. And I'm passing back over to Charlie now to discuss this case example.
Okay, so yeah, just an example of how I almost said community trigger. I'm still catching myself on it. I know it's been since March, but I still trip up. How the ASB case review can apply. So over the course of 9 months, a complainant reports several incidents of a gang of youths gathering in a playground adjacent to her house. They drink, smoke, play music and use foul and abusive language, often until late at night. The local neighbourhood policing team have moved the group on when they have witnessed it. However, of course, due to stretched resources, this has only been on 2 occasions. The complainant has been threatened as a grass and is now scared to leave her property after dark. When talking to a family member, the complainant hears about the ASB case review process and decides to put an application into her local authority. So as you can see here, we're looking at something that's been occurring over the course of 9 months. So immediately we've ticked that box of 6 months upwards. She's reported several incidents, so I would imagine that's 3 or more of the antisocial behaviour. Now, it doesn't say who she's reported to, but given the local neighbourhood policing team have been involved, I would imagine that it's gone to the police, potentially the local council, and if she, of course, is in a housing association property, she may well have reported it to them as well. So in this situation, we can see here that there has been some action taken. So the local police team have done what they can within the resources they've got to move this behaviour on. But it's still ongoing, and she is now feeling quite vulnerable and intimidated. So in putting the ASB case review application in, all she has to do is have met that criteria as Casey's explained, 3 incidents within 6 months to either the police, local authority or housing association. So from this we would say, yeah, it's pretty much assured that she has met that criteria. So what we would expect to happen then is that the lead agency for the ASB case review, depending on the area, it would usually be either the police or the local authority, would convene a panel of experts. So any agency that has any input into this case, so I would probably say the policing team, the local authority, potentially environmental health if there's issues of litter and waste being left around the playground, maybe a housing association if this playground's based within a local estate. Essentially what we would generally recommend is anyone who can offer skills and experience to input into the problem solving of this case should be sat around the table at that ASB case review meeting. At which point, you know, given the tools that Katie's taken us through, there's many steps that can be taken, whether it be that come a certain time in the afternoon, that playground is locked up and no one can gain access to it until the next day, whether it be that the individuals who are perpetrating the antisocial behaviour can be identified. If they're identified as tenants of a housing association, then tenancy action can be taken against them, despite the fact that this behaviour is being perpetrated away from the home. If it's in the locality of where they live, then tenancy action is enforceable. Obviously, the police can make arrests if there's any kind of drug use, etc., that's going on there. Environmental health can get involved if the music is too loud, or as we said about litter and waste. There's many options here, and many agencies that can weigh in on it, and that is the beauty of the ASB case review, is that partnership approach and that multi-agency input into problem solving a case. Now, obviously, the penultimate line there being the complainant's been threatened as a grass, that would immediately bring safeguarding concerns to us, and fears of vulnerability and threats. So we would probably be looking further up the ladder of incremental enforcement in cases such as this, because it's very important that victim is offered protection. If there is any action that is taken against those youths, which potentially is going to aggrieve them because their fun social life has been disrupted, they're potentially going to want to look for someone to blame for that. So it goes hand in hand. While we enforce, we need to make sure that we protect as well. And that's where the beauty of things like injunctions and protection, powers of arrest, etc., all come in. So there's many tools available in a case like this, but actually, as you can see, the ASB case review is the first step. For a victim to put that application in, then it means that we get everyone around the table and we all share information. And it may well be that some of the agencies weren't aware that other agencies were involved. We still hope that doesn't happen. You know, in this day and age, we actually hope that regularly agencies have meetings where they share case information. We know it doesn't always happen. And it may be that in calling a case review, it raises that awareness of, oh, actually, well, we attended something about that the other week and we didn't realise that you'd been there the week before for something else. So, you know, the information gets shared and it's productive moving forwards. So that's just a really big tool that needs to be emphasised within your communities. And you know, we have got a link to it on our website. I think we've got a directory on our website, haven't we, Katie? Oh, you've been muted.
I've muted myself because I didn't want to
Okay.
interrupt you or call. Like, I've got children in the background too, so I didn't want to. Yes, there is a directory on our website. The links get updated regularly, but I can't for definite say 100% of all the links change, because as local authorities are now changing from ASB community trigger to case review, I think some of them are going to have to be changed. But if some of them work, if you literally just go onto your local authority website and put either community trigger or ASB case review into their search engine, it should bring up some information about the process in that local area. It might be that the applications I know in Gloucestershire generally go through the PCC, but there will be information on your local authority websites that direct you to the application process. But it just differs from area to area.
It's that same thing we've talked about, isn't it, where it is unfortunately a postcode lottery.
Yeah.
We're just doing a little bit of digging.
What I will say is it is the victim's tool and it is the victim's voice. So actually that meeting that comes together to look at the case that you're applying for, you should be invited to the start of that meeting. You can't stay for it all, because obviously the perpetrator who you're complaining about will also be discussed, and there might be information that can't be disclosed to yourself. But what is important is you get the chance to go to that meeting and talk about the harm and the impact that that ASB has had on you, and actually what you have, what you would like to see happen, so they can build in and either manage your expectations because maybe they're too high, or actually have just like I said, a really realistic conversation about this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. I understand someone's just put something on the chat as well about appeals. There should be an ability to query. Once you have an outcome letter from an ASB case review, you should have the ability to query that upon, but there's certain things you can only query on. So it's more about whether they follow their ASB case review policies and procedures, or actually if they've decided you don't meet the threshold in the first place, you can question that. If you're not happy, if they say no, you haven't met it, there's not been 3, I would always say query it, because just because there hasn't been 3 reported doesn't necessarily mean it hasn't been persistent. You might have just reported it to the wrong agency. And it's important they take that into account when they're reviewing, and it's not just here's the 3, right, okay, this is only 1 or this is only 2. They've got to take put the whole thing into context and have a look at the whole issue before deciding whether the threshold is met.
I'm going to let you carry on, Katie, because we're on to the good old action plan.
So it's, from our point of view, ASB is well and truly on the national agenda, and me and Charlie are like, yes, fantastic. Because we've been banging our drum for such a long time that it was about time that ASB is up there, because we recognise that it's one of those issues that is high on the agenda for most residents within England and Wales in some form or another. So the government have launched an ASB action plan, which again is available on the internet. If you just put government action plan, it was at the end of March, it was launched. And you might have seen some newspaper articles about it, getting tough on crime, and very much about, you might have heard the words immediate justice and hotspot areas, which is basically saying within 48 hours within particular areas. So they've chosen so many areas within England and Wales, which are the higher levels of ASB, for a certain length of time to trial this. It's called whereby, yeah, like I said, if someone's committed a crime, within 48 hours, they're looking at repairing that damage either to the individual or to the wider the community. So there was a lot of talk about cleaning graffiti, washing police cars, wearing high-vis jackets, and maybe picking up rubbish as well. So repairing that damage like within 48 hours. And as again, they're piloting that within so many areas within England and Wales, with hopefully, they said, the chance to then roll that out. The other thing was hotspot policing, so more visibility of police, not only police, but like official wardens in public transport, green spaces, and the high street. But the thing we have concerns about is that's all about environmental crime and what people see. It's all about the visibility of action being taken. There is still nothing there to do with support for victims of ASB, and not as much information about kind of personal ASB rather than the environmental side. There's talk about, you might see those little silver gas canisters, which are nitrous oxide, laughing gas, that are left and littered all around the place. So there was some actions looking to be taken in relation to that too, in terms of banning nitrous oxide and doing more on the spot drug testing for those kind of offences. But like I said, there's nothing there to standardise support for victims of persistent ongoing ASB. And I think, as we mentioned earlier, it has we recognise the impact, so it can be so debilitating for someone who's ongoing, living in their own home. They shouldn't have to fear leaving their front door. They shouldn't have to move their house around to try and get some sleep. Yet we hear from these people day in, day out. So we do feel like there's a missed opportunity there to provide a standardised support for victims of ASB, which isn't automatically given across England and Wales. So yeah, but there is some stuff in relation to housing as well. So they are very much saying, and you, if anyone has read it, they will say 3 strikes and you're out for social housing tenants, proven strikes, that is. I'm not quite sure how that will work in practice. So we're just waiting for further information, really. Obviously, it was only a 47-page report. So what they're hoping to do of the action plan is develop a task group to actually look at this a little bit more detail and define the processes and provide some clarification about how some things might work. I appreciate 3 strikes and you're out. If someone's just throwing litter over your fence 3 times, then a judge particularly isn't going to grant possession for that. But yeah, and there's also the one thing that is really important for residents, which I think is a really positive, is there's going to be a new digital reporting tool. So we would always argue the easier it is to report ASB and know who you need to report to is beneficial for any victim that's suffering. So if that process is made easier, then that is fantastic for us, really. What is good, and they intimate that when you report ASB, it's not just about reporting, that you will get feedback and updates. One thing we do realise that is lacking quite a lot is communication and regular updates, and it's about you knowing what's happening with the report that you've made. So actually, if that feedback is 2-way and you get those regular updates again for victims, that's a bonus.
You've nailed it there, I think, and that with that last point, and I know you mentioned that earlier, is it is great and there is a lot of positives, but what we want is support. We want that support for victims.
Yeah.
We will continue to beat that drum, won't we?
Yeah, I mean, to just clarify that and put that into perspective. So if you're a victim of crime and your plant pot is damaged in your front garden, you are entitled to victim support. If you have blaring noise nuisance so many hours a day, and have had something which possibly hasn't met the criminal threshold, but you've had a bit of there's some ongoing issues with neighbours, then that hasn't met a criminal threshold, so there's been no crimes in relation to the ASB that's been caused, then you're not entitled to have that ASB support. I say not. In some counties they have commissioned a service specifically for ASB victims, but we can't take that for granted, and this is the reason why we are pushing as hard as we can, because we really do feel like it should be standardized. And ASB level, just ASB, like Charlie was saying earlier, when it can have such a detrimental impact on people's lives, it can be truly devastating, and that support is definitely required.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think I've
that's it.
finished that.
That's all. We'll take a breath. John, I'll let you come back in.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Kate. I think you've covered so much in such a short space of time. We know that ASB is such a huge, broad subject, and thank you for bringing that to us today, because I think, as you've also seen in the chat today, there's lots of different types of ASB that people are experiencing. There's lots of issues around that they've attempted to have, they've attempted to report. They feel that nothing gets done, and I know that this isn't the first time or the last time that you'll be hearing that, unfortunately. And we know that ASB in particular is very, very damaging to people's and communities' mental health. So thank you so much for today. I can see that we are just about to go over time. So what I would love to do is to so that all of the questions are answered, is if we can put them in a document to you, and then if
Absolutely.
you complete the answers, and we can share that with everyone. So we're not dismissing any questions, but we're conscious of the time, and we did say it was going to be for an hour, and I know that there's been so much to talk about today. I'm going to ask
send it all over to it.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to ask if I could possibly share my screen, because it has our and that would be fantastic. I just want to share our screen. My husband's just telling me don't forget my tea. So in case you had that, I do apologise. It's my cup of tea. So I do apologise. Can you see?
We can see that now, Cheryl. We can
Which
see.
one can you see?
Please help us by completing a short survey.
Perfect. So if you can scan the QR code and fill in a survey, it takes less than 3 minutes. But what we would love to do is to enable you. We will send you all an email tomorrow with the links, and the video. Today's session will be online so that everybody can view it. I hope that you've taken anything away from this, is that you must keep reporting. It's so important. And I know sometimes it feels very alone, very disconcerting, but please do continue to report and keep having those conversations about ASB with people. It's good to talk about it. It's good to share, and it's with Neighbourhood Watch. When we've got a good neighbourhood watch in your street, in your road, you've got that support structure, you've got that support from neighbours. So if you're not already within a neighbourhood watch area, please consider either joining or starting one. I know that's our little plug for that, but I would like to again thank both Charlie and Kate for your wonderful time today. It's been really, really helpful and enlightening on many factors. So thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Katie.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you,
everybody.
Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.
And we'll send you everybody an email tomorrow, and you'll receive the links so that you can access the recording too. Thank you so much. Bye bye then.
Bye bye.
Take care.
Good night.